They dismissed me on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because the laundry came on Tuesdays, and there was a girl crossing the yard with a basket of the Queen's linens when they walked me out, and she stopped, and she watched me go, and I have thought about that girl's face more than almost anything else from that whole time. She didn't know what I'd done. Nobody told the laundry girls anything. She just saw an old guardsman being walked out the small gate with his life in a canvas bag, and she stopped and she watched, and there was something in her face, not pity exactly, more like recognition. Like she'd seen it before. Like she knew the place ate people and here was one more being spat out the side of it. 31 years I'd served the household of Caldwich. They gave me the small gate, not the main gate where there might be people, where it might look like something. The small gate by the laundry yard, early, quiet, a man with a paper and a clerk's signature and 2 younger guards I'd half-trained myself who couldn't look at me. And that was it. 31 years out the laundry gate on a Tuesday because of 7 words I'd said at a dinner table 3 weeks before. I'm going to tell you about the 7 words, but I'm going to do it the way it actually sits in me, which is backwards because that's how I've lived with it, starting from the gate and working back, the way you'd follow a thread back through a dark house to find the room it started in. The end first, then the middle. And the thing that caused all of it, the real thing, the thing nobody at that table knew but me, I'll come to last, because it's the heaviest and I want to run up to it. So the gate, the Tuesday, start there. I wasn't angry going out the gate. People expect I'd have been angry and I wasn't, and it took me years to understand why, and the reason is that I'd already decided, weeks before, that it was worth it. You can't be angry about a price you agreed to pay. I'd looked at what I was about to do in the half-second before I did it, and some part of me had said this will cost you everything you've built, and another part had said yes, and do it anyway, and I'd done it anyway, and so the gate was just the bill arriving, and you don't rage at a bill you knew was coming. I was sad. There's a difference. I was sad the way you're sad closing a door on a house you lived your whole life in, even a house that wasn't always kind to you. But angry, no. What I felt mostly going out that gate was light. That surprised me. I'd carried that household on my back for 3 decades, the weight of all those silences, all the things you see and don't say, all the swallowing, and I'd broken the rule, finally said one true thing out loud in a room where true things were forbidden. And even though it cost me everything, I walked out lighter than I'd walked in 31 years before. Make of that what you will. I've never fully made anything of it. It just is what it was. Back up, before the gate, there were the 3 weeks of waiting. That's its own kind of torture, the waiting, the way that place did it. They didn't dismiss me that night at the dinner in the heat of it. That's not how Caldwich worked. Caldwich was cold and patient and it let you sit. So for 3 weeks after the dinner I went on with my duties as if nothing had happened, except everything had happened, and everyone knew it, and nobody said it. And I'd walk the corridors and feel the look slide off me, the way the other guards' eyes would find somewhere else to be. I'd become a dead man still walking around. They were deciding what to do with me, up in the quiet rooms, and they took their time, because part of the punishment was the not knowing. The 3 weeks of a man lying awake wondering if it would be a quiet dismissal or something worse. Because I'd done something that touched the Queen directly, and there were people in that court who'd have liked to make an example, who'd have liked it to be worse than a gate. I'll tell you the strangest thing about those 3 weeks. The Queen never spoke to me, not once. I was on her household, I was near her daily, and after that night she never said one word to me, never met my eye, nothing, and I understood it. I understood it completely, because to acknowledge me would have been to acknowledge what I'd seen, what I'd named in front of the whole table, and she could not afford to acknowledge it, not by a flicker, not to me, not to anyone. So she gave me nothing. And I gave her nothing back, the same nothing I'd given everyone for 31 years, the guardsman's nothing. But on the last day, the Tuesday, as they were getting the paper ready before they walked me down, there was a thing, a small thing. A footman brought it to my quarters, no word, no note, just put it on the table and left. It was a coin. An old one worn smooth. The kind that's not worth anything. The kind you'd carry for luck or for memory and not for spending. I knew the coin. I'll tell you how I knew the coin later. It belongs to the end, to the root of all this. But she'd sent it. The Queen had sent me a worn old coin with no word, on the morning I was put out the gate, and that coin said everything she could never say, the whole speech she'd never be allowed to give, folded down into a piece of metal a man could close his fist around. I have it still. I'll have it on me when I go. That's the aftermath. Now the night itself, the dinner, the 7 words. It was a state dinner. I forget the occasion, some treaty, some visiting delegation, the kind of thing called, which did beautifully. The long table, the silver, the candlelight doubling itself in the dark windows. The whole performance of a royal house being exactly what people need a royal house to be. Serene, eternal, untouched by the ordinary catastrophes of ordinary lives. That was the whole point of these dinners. To perform untouchedness. To sit at a long, bright table and be, for 3 hours, a thing that does not break. I was on the wall. That was my post that night, the wall behind the Queen's end of the table where a guard stands and his furniture and sees everything. I'd stood that post 1,000 times. You learn to disappear. You learn to be a shape in the shadow between 2 candle sconces, present and absent at once. And you watch. You always watch. That's the job. You watch the room for the one wrong thing and 1,000 right ones. And I watched the Queen that night the way I'd watched her for years, and I knew, alone in that room, knew that she was holding herself together with nothing, with sheer will and 30 years of practice and absolutely nothing underneath. Because of the thing that had happened a few hours before, the thing I'll come to. To everyone else at that table she was the Queen, serene, a little remote maybe, a little pale but performing perfectly. To me she was a person standing on a frozen lake hearing it crack. And then the boy spilled the wine. His name was Watt. A serving boy, 14 maybe, 15, new, one of the ones brought in extra for the big dinners, terrified, the way they all are their first few times, hands shaking carrying things worth more than his family's house. And he was pouring at the Queen's end and his hand shook or someone moved or the cloth caught his sleeve. I don't even know. It happened the way these things happen, in an instant, and the wine went over. Not much. A splash. Red wine across the white cloth near the Queen's place and a few drops, a very few, on the edge of her sleeve. Nothing, it was nothing. At any other dinner it would have been nothing. A footman would have laid a fresh napkin over it. The boy would have been quietly hated for a week and then forgotten. The table would have flowed on. Nothing. And the Queen erupted. I won't dress it up, it was ugly. It was the ugliest thing I ever saw her do, and I'd seen her do hard things, cold things, but this was different. This came up out of her like something breaking loose. And she turned on that boy and the words don't matter, I won't repeat them. But it was vicious. It was personal, it was a grown woman, a queen with all the power in the world, bringing the whole weight of herself down onto a shaking 14-year-old over a splash of wine, in front of 40 people. And the table went dead silent. That horrible frozen silence, and the boy went white and then red and his eyes filled, and he stood there with the bottle still in his hand, not knowing whether to run or kneel or die. And she kept on. She wasn't stopping. There was something in her that had broken its banks and was pouring out, and it had found this boy, this innocent, terrified boy, to pour out onto, because he was the smallest thing in the room, and the thing inside her needed somewhere small to go. And I watched it from the wall, from my shape in the shadow, and I knew 2 things at once with total clarity. The first thing I knew was that this was indefensible. I want to be honest about that, the way I've tried to be honest about all of it. What she was doing to that boy was wrong. Whatever was underneath it, whatever I knew that no one else knew, it did not make it right. You do not get to destroy a child because your own heart is breaking. The breaking is a reason and it is not a permission. And I knew, watching, that she was in the wrong, fully, plainly. And the second thing I knew was why. I knew exactly why. I was the only one in that room who knew why. And knowing why didn't excuse it, but it did something else. It showed me the way out. It showed me the one thing that might stop it, because I understood that she wasn't really shouting at Watt at all. Watt was nothing to her. Watt was just where the flood went. She was shouting at someone who wasn't in the room, someone who'd never be in the room again, and the boy was just standing in the path of it. And I had a choice. The choice every guard has and almost never takes. I could stay furniture, stay the shape in the shadow, let it run its course, let her destroy the boy and let the table thaw and let it all be smoothed over later the way everything was smoothed over, and keep my post and my 31 years and my pension and my silence. That was the right choice. That was the only correct choice for a man in my position. Furniture does not speak. Furniture has no opinion about what is done in the room. Or I could speak. And I knew in the half-second that if I spoke it would end me, because a guardsman does not speak at a state table. A guardsman does not address the queen unbidden. A guardsman certainly does not interrupt the queen mid-fury to tell her something true. That was the end of everything. That was the gate on a Tuesday. I knew it even as I felt my mouth opening. I stepped off the wall, one step, out of the shadow into the candlelight, where a guard is never supposed to be, and 40 heads didn't turn because they were all frozen on the queen and the boy. But she felt it, the movement at the edge, and she stopped mid-word and her head came round to me. This furniture that had moved, this shape that had stepped out of the dark, and her face was terrible. It was rage and grief and shame all at once with no skin left over them. And for 1 second she looked at me with that face. And I said the 7 words. I said them quietly, just for her really, though the silence was so total the whole table heard. I looked at her and I tipped my head just slightly, toward the boy, toward Watt, white and shaking with the bottle in his hand, and I said, "He's not the one, ma'am, not him. That's all, he's not the one, not him." 7 words, and I watched them go into her. I have spent the rest of my life trying to describe what happened in her face when those words landed, and I've never managed it, and I won't manage it now, but I'll try once more. It was like watching someone wake up. That's the closest I can get. She'd been somewhere else, somewhere down in the flood, lost in it, drowning in it and dragging the boy down with her, and 7 words from a piece of furniture reached down into the water and got hold of her and pulled her face up into the air, and she came up, and she saw, for the first time, really saw the boy. The actual boy, 14 years old, terrified, innocent, nothing to do with any of it. She saw what she was doing. She saw who she was doing it to. And she saw that I knew that's the part that ended me. She saw in my face that I knew the real thing, the thing underneath. The thing no one else in that room or that palace or that kingdom knew. And that I just told her gently in front of everyone, but in a language only she could read. I know where this is really aimed, and that boy is not the target, and you don't have to do this. You can stop. I'm giving you the way to stop. And she stopped. She closed her mouth. She straightened. She looked at the boy, and something moved across her face that might have been the beginning of an apology, though a queen can't apologize to a serving boy at a state table. The world isn't built to allow it, but it was there, the wish to, the shape of it. And then she did the only thing she could do, which was leave. She rose, and when the queen rises, the whole table rises, scraping chairs, a forest of standing. And she said something to the delegation about being unwell, her voice gone formal and thin and held together, and she left the hall, walking very straight, the way she walked when she was holding the most. And the dinner collapsed behind her into murmur and ruin. A state dinner abandoned, a scandal, a disaster. And it was all my doing, 7 words from the wall. And I knew, as I stepped back into the shadow, that I was finished. The boy lived, by the way. What? That's the thing I hold on to. They kept him on quietly, I heard. The queen herself saw to it that he wasn't dismissed for the spill, which tells you something. Tells you she came up out of that water all the way. And he grew up, and he's probably an old man now himself somewhere. And he never knew, I'd wager. He never knew that the only reason he wasn't destroyed at 14 in front of 40 strangers was that an old guardsman stepped off a wall and spent his whole career to buy the boy a way out. He'd not remember my name. Why would he? But he lived his life instead of carrying that night the way I've carried mine, and that's That's worth a gate on a Tuesday. That alone is worth it. I worked that out years ago and it's held up. But I haven't told you the root yet, the thing underneath, why he wasn't the one. Who the one actually was. I said I'd come to it last, and here it is, the room at the bottom of the dark house, the thing that caused all of it. A few hours before that dinner, the Queen's son left. Prince Ewan, her only child. He'd been at odds with the king for a year, some matter of the succession of politics of two proud men unable to bend, and it had curdled, the way these things do in great families, into something past politics, into a real and final rupture, and that afternoon it had come to its end. The prince was leaving Caldwich, not for a season, for good. Renouncing his place, taking himself out of the line, out of the family, out of the country, choosing his own life over the crown, which the histories would later dress up as principle, and which was really just a young man who could no longer breathe in his father's house. And he came to say goodbye to his mother, and I was on the door. That's how I knew. That's the whole of how I came to be the only person at that dinner who understood. I was on the door of the Queen's private rooms that afternoon when her son came to tell her he was leaving forever, and a guard on a door hears everything and is nothing, and I heard it. I heard a young man tell his mother he was going and never coming back, and I heard through a closed door, muffled, but I heard her ask him not to. I heard the Queen of Caldwich, who I had never once in 31 years heard ask anyone for anything, ask her son not to leave her, and I heard him say no. Gently, I think, but no. And I heard the door of her inner room and his footsteps coming out past me, this young man with his jaw set and his eyes wet, walking out of his mother's life, and he didn't look at me. Why would he? I was the door. And before he went, this is the coin. This is where the coin comes in. Before he went, in the outer room, he stopped, and he took something from his pocket. An old coin, worn smooth, a child's keepsake, the kind of worthless, precious thing a small boy gives his mother. And I understood later that she'd given it back to him at some point, or he'd kept it all these years, I never knew which. But he stood in the outer room holding this coin that had passed between them when he was small, and he couldn't go back in to give it to her. He'd already said his goodbye, going back would have broken him, so he turned and he pressed it into my hand. The door's hand. The furniture's hand. He pressed his childhood coin into a guardsman's palm and he said, these were his only words to me in 31 years. He said, give it to her. After, not now, after. And he left. So I had it in my pocket, at the dinner, the coin. Her son's coin, the little worn proof that he'd once been a small boy who loved her, pressed into my hand by the same boy grown up and walking out forever, with instructions to give it to her after, when the wound had had time to close enough to bear it. And she sat down at that state dinner a few hours after her only child had told her he never wanted to see her again, and she'd been ordered by the king, by the council, by the whole machine, to host it anyway, to perform the serene, untouched royal house anyway, to sit at a long, bright table and be a thing that does not break, on the night she had broken more completely than she ever would in her life. That's who the boy wasn't. He's not the one, ma'am. The one was 3 hours gone, out the main gate, out of the country, out of her life. The boy with the wine was just standing where the grief came out. And I was the only one who knew because I'd been on the door, because I had her son's coin in my pocket. And so I was the only one who could say the words that would reach her. And I said them, knowing the cost, and I paid the cost, and I'd pay it again. I gave her the coin 3 weeks later, not the way her son meant. I'd meant to those first days after, like he said, but then the dinner happened and I was a dead man walking and there was never a moment. She never met my eye, and I thought it would go into the ground with me, his last gift to her, undelivered, the worst failure of my life on top of all the rest. So on that Tuesday, the morning of the gate, I sent it to her, through the footman. No word, what word could there be? Just the coin. Her son's coin, finally delivered after the way he'd wanted, by the furniture he'd entrusted it to. On the last morning the furniture would ever be inside those walls. I'd kept it safe 3 weeks and a few hours, and I got it to her before I went. And that, more than the dinner, more than the boy, more than the 7 words, that's the thing I did right. That's the one I'm sure of. And she sent it back. That's the thing I told you about at the start, working backwards. The coin that came to my quarters that morning with no word. I thought, when I started telling you this, that she'd sent me a coin of her own, a worn old keepsake, a wordless speech. But that's not it. That's not it at all. It was his coin, the one I just sent up to her. She'd held it for an hour, her son's childhood in her hand, the last of him, and she'd sent it back down to me. To the man being put out the gate for saying the one true thing. To the door who'd carried it. She gave me her son's coin, the most precious thing she had left in the world, and there was no word with it because there couldn't be, but I knew exactly. It said, "You carried this for me. You carried all of it for me. Take it. I have nothing else to give the only person who saw." I tried to refuse it. I did. I sent it back up one more time. It wasn't mine, it was hers. It was the last of her boy. And it came down a third time, final. And this time the footman did have a word, 3 words, her words, the only ones she ever sent me, and they were, "He'd want you to." So I have a worn old coin that belonged to a small boy who grew into a prince who walked out of his mother's life. And it was given to a guardsman by a grieving queen on the morning. He was dismissed for loving her enough to tell her the truth. And I've carried it 30 years since. And I'll have it in my fist when I go into the ground. And that's the whole story, told backwards, from the gate to the root. He's not the one, not him. 7 words. They cost me everything I'd built, and they're the best thing I ever said, and I'd say them again tomorrow, at the same table, at the same price, without 1/2 second's pause. That's what I know now that I didn't know going out the gate light on that Tuesday, with a girl watching from the laundry yard. Some things are worth the gate.